My wife inherited a fortune from a man nobody in our family knew. Then his lawyer came looking for me. I knew something was wrong when the lawyer asked my wife to sit down before he told her how much money she had inherited. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate her. He simply placed a thick folder on the table and said, "Mrs. Carter, before I explain the inheritance, there's something about your family history you need to understand." My wife looked at me. I looked at the lawyer. Neither of us had any idea what he was talking about. 3 days earlier, we'd been living our normal life. We weren't wealthy. We weren't struggling either. I worked as an accountant for a manufacturing company. My wife, Emily, worked as a graphic designer. We owned a small house, had 2 cars, and were saving for a bigger place. Then an envelope arrived. It was addressed to Emily. Inside was a letter from a law firm we'd never heard of. It said a man named Richard Hale had died, and that Emily was named as the primary beneficiary of his estate. I assumed it was a mistake. Emily didn't know anyone named Richard Hale. Neither did I. The lawyer asked us to come to his office. We almost didn't go. Then we saw the estimated value of the estate, $18 million. Suddenly, ignoring the letter didn't seem like an option. We arrived at the law office on Monday morning. The lawyer introduced himself as Jonathan Reed. He was calm and professional. He opened the folder. Richard Hale owned several properties, investment accounts, and a private company. Emily stared at him. Why would he leave any of that to me? Jonathan took a breath. That's what we're here to explain. He pulled out a photograph. It showed a young man standing beside a woman. Emily's face went pale. She recognized the woman. It was her mother. Her mother had died when Emily was 12, but the man beside her was a complete stranger. "Who is he?" Emily asked. Jonathan answered, "Richard Hale." Emily shook her head. "I've never heard that name." Jonathan nodded. "I know." He pulled out another document. "This is your birth certificate." Emily looked confused. "Yes, now look at this." He placed another document beside it. It was an old medical record. The name of Emily's father was different. Not the man she'd grown up calling Dad. A different man, Richard Hale. Emily couldn't speak. I reached for her hand. She pulled it away, not from me. She was simply shaking. "My father isn't Richard." Jonathan nodded. "The man who raised you wasn't your biological father." The room went silent. Emily stared at the photograph again. "You're saying that man was my real father?" "Yes." She started crying. Her entire life had just been rewritten in a single sentence. Her mother had never told her. The man who raised her had never told her. And the biological father she had never known had just left her $18 million. But Jonathan wasn't finished. "There is another condition." Emily wiped her eyes. "What condition?" "Before the estate can be transferred, you need to meet someone." "Who?" "Your biological father's former business partner. His name was Victor." Victor was 72 years old. He lived in a massive house outside the city. We drove there 2 days later. When Victor opened the door, he looked at Emily for several seconds. Then he said, "You have your father's eye." Emily didn't answer. Victor invited us inside. He told us the story. Richard Hale had been wealthy, but he hadn't always been. He had built his company from nothing. Then 25 years earlier, he'd fallen in love with Emily's mother. They had been together for several years, but her mother eventually left him. She married another man. That man became Emily's legal father. Richard believed Emily was his daughter. He wanted to be involved, but Emily's mother refused. She told him she wanted to raise her daughter without him. Richard eventually agreed, but he never stopped watching from a distance. He secretly paid for Emily's medical expenses. He sent birthday gifts. He even paid for part of her college education. Emily had never known. I asked Victor why Richard had never contacted her. Victor looked down. "Because your mother made him promise." "Why?" Victor hesitated. Then he told us the part nobody had mentioned. Richard had enemies, business rivals, people who wanted his company. He believed keeping Emily away from him would protect her, so he stayed hidden. But there was another reason. Richard had discovered that someone close to him was stealing from his company. He spent years trying to figure out who. He eventually discovered that several executives were involved. But before he could expose them, he became seriously ill. That's why he'd created the will. He wanted Emily to inherit the company and the money, but only after she knew the truth. We returned home that evening. Emily was devastated. She had spent her entire life believing her father was the man who raised her. Now she discovered that her biological father had secretly been part of her life without her knowing. For the next few weeks, we investigated everything. Jonathan gave us access to Richard's record. There were letters, hundreds of them. Most were addressed to Emily. He had written one every birthday. He described what he imagined she was doing, her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding, even though he wasn't there. One letter said, "I hope someday you'll understand that staying away was the hardest way I knew to love you." Emily couldn't read that one without crying. But then we found something strange. One letter mentioned a man named Thomas. Thomas had been Richard's chief financial officer. According to the records, Thomas had resigned shortly before Richard died. We investigated him. That's when things became dangerous. Our house was broken into. Nothing valuable was taken, except the box containing Richard's letters. Someone wanted them. We called Jonathan. He told us not to speak to anyone, especially anyone connected to Richard's company. The next morning, Emily received an anonymous message. "You don't know what your father left you." Then another, "Give up the inheritance." She showed me the messages. I told her we should go to the police. Before we could, Victor called. "Someone knows about the letters." "Who?" "Thomas." Victor explained that Thomas had been Richard's closest business associate. Richard discovered Thomas Thomas had been stealing money, millions, but Thomas wasn't working alone. Someone inside the family had helped him. We assumed it was one of Richard's employees. Then Victor said, "It was your mother." Emily froze. My wife stared at the phone. No. Victor explained that Emily's mother had known about the stolen money. She hadn't originally participated, but Thomas had threatened her. He claimed he could destroy Richard's company. She became involved because she was terrified. Then she discovered something worse. Thomas wasn't stealing for himself. He was preparing to take over the entire company. Richard had discovered the plan. That's why he had hidden Emily. He was afraid Thomas would eventually use her against him. But there was another problem. Emily's mother had died years earlier. She couldn't explain anything, so we had to find the evidence ourselves. Jonathan discovered a storage unit registered under Richard's name. Inside were boxes of financial records. There were contracts, bank statements, copies of emails, and one handwritten note. It said, "If anything happens to me, don't trust Thomas." We gave everything to investigators. The investigation moved quickly. Thomas was located. He had been living under a different name. He was arrested, but he wasn't alone. Several former executives were involved. The company had been losing money for years. Richard had hidden the losses because he was trying to catch everyone involved. Then came the biggest surprise. The $18 million wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was the company. Richard had left Emily controlling ownership. She suddenly became responsible for hundreds of employees. She had never run a business before. She didn't even know she was going to inherit one. She wanted to sell it. I understood why. She wanted nothing to do with the life that had been hidden from her. But Jonathan showed her another letter. It was Richard's final letter. He wrote, "If you choose to sell everything, I will understand. The company is only money. You are my daughter. That is the only thing I wanted you to know." Emily cried. She kept the company, not because she wanted to become wealthy, because she wanted to understand the father she never knew. She spent months learning how the company worked. She kept the employees who had done nothing wrong. She removed the executives involved in the fraud, and she created a scholarship in Richard's name. Then she did something I never expected. She found the man who had raised her, the man she'd called Dad. He was still alive. He had known Richard was her biological father. He had known for years. Emily asked him why he had never told her. He said, "Your mother begged me not to." Emily was furious. "You let me believe he abandoned me." He started crying. "I thought I was protecting you." She didn't forgive him immediately, but eventually she did. Not because what he did was right, because she realized that everyone around her had been making decisions for her. Her mother, her legal father, Richard, even the people who claimed to protect her. For the first time, Emily decided what she wanted. She kept the company. She kept the house Richard had left her. But she didn't live like a billionaire. She continued driving her old car. She kept our little house for another year. Eventually, we moved into a larger home, but it wasn't a mansion. She didn't suddenly become obsessed with money. In fact, she became more careful with it. A year after everything happened, Emily and I visited Richard's grave. She stood there quietly. Then she said, "I spent my whole life thinking my father didn't want me." I put my arm around her. She looked at the gravestone. "Now I know he spent his whole life wanting to know me." She placed a letter beside the flowers. It was the first letter she had ever written to him. We left it there. Walking back to the car, she said something I'll never forget. "Do you know what the strangest part is?" "What?" "I inherited millions from a man I never knew." She paused. "But the thing I wanted most wasn't the money." "What was it?" "Knowing he loved me. And that was the real inheritance, not the company, not the properties, not the $18 million. It was finally knowing that the man she'd spent her whole life believing had abandoned her had actually been waiting for a chance to tell her the truth. The money changed our lives. The truth changed hers. And sometimes, the biggest inheritance isn't something you receive. It's the answer to a question you've been carrying your entire life.
Like and subscribe for more videos like these. Thanks for watching.